Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. And I'm back taking another look at Yukito Kishiro's Battle Angel Alita. And we are pretty much past the story of the movie. And there's going to be a few more comparisons to the film in here, but this is largely now going to be an analysis of the story of Kishiro wrote going forward. There are just really a few more points to discuss as relate to the movie, primarily regarding Motorball, the Damascus Blade, and the nature of the villain Desti Nova. I'm going to leave Nova off until we discuss the second half of Motorball and what it means to Kishiro's version of Alita. But in this discussion, I really want to take a look at some of the symbolic things that we are building up here as language in Alita's story, and how those symbols were basically tossed to the wayside as Cameron and Rodriguez were doing their story. So let's start with the basic recap. We know that Alita was in love with a kid named Hugo. Hugo was a really terrible person. He was crippling people for his own financial benefit because he wanted to go to the floating city of Salem. Alita eventually learned all of this, and she still tried to save Hugo. She also tried to reform him, but she was really blinded by her infatuation with Hugo to his worst characteristics. Not so much so Ito, but Alita was really behaving as a young girl who was just in love and totally carried away by her emotions. As I said before, this represents Alita's impulses. Again, Kishiro's story is a story of human impulses balanced against human obligations, and it illustrates very well the dangers of leaning too far in either direction. After Hugo's death, Alita becomes pretty grief-stricken. She gets wrapped up in it, and this drives her to Motorball, not as in the film as a way to get to Salem and confront Nova, a behavior which makes no sense because we know you never get to Salem from the Scrap Iron City. In fact, the only way that Sheeran could do it was to get broken down into body parts, so why would you think you get to go there as a Motorball player? It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. This is one of the major plot holes, I think, in the film that never made any sense to me. No, Alita in Kishiro's story takes up Motorball as a distraction from her grief. That is really the only reason she starts playing Motorball. She's a good fighter. She has an athletic mind, for lack of a better way to put it, because, I mean, her body is just a machine, right? She actually is wearing not her berserker body, but the professional motorballer's body for the entirety of this story arc. She never uses that particular cyber body in this story. So she has this mind that is well trained and excellent at executing athletic maneuvers. So she joins Motorball, and her goal really is just to get the rush. She wants to compete. She wants to be the best, and she wants to get that rush, which will distract her from her grief over Hugo's death. This is another impulse. This is not Alita is not swinging back from impulse to structure. She is going deeper into impulse to hide from her grief. And we are shown that in a couple of really great ways. It's not immediately obvious that that's what she's doing. But in order to show us really what Motorball is, there's a fascinating opening sequence where Ito, who is going through Scrap Iron City looking for Alita, gets the opportunity to use this ride-along mechanism. Let me see if I can find a shot of it. Basically, it lets him see, hear, and feel. Here it is. So it's that little helmet thing. You pull it down over your face. You see and hear and feel everything that a professional Motorball player is feeling as they go around the circuit. And let me stop here and explain a little bit about what Motorball is. It is a sport. It is a racing sport where you take a ball, this red one here on the cover, and you run laps around a track with it. That doesn't really sound that interesting, but it's also kind of roller derby. So you have these cyborg bodies that, you know, they drive them around the ring, and they fight with each other over the Motorball and over positioning and a whole bunch of other things. Obviously, there are people who just play Motorball to fight. So it's a pretty interesting sport. It's got the speed demon element. It's got the combat element. Alita is very good at it. But because she's a new player, she has to work her way up the ranks. So she joins at a fairly low ranking. She's in the 3rd division. There are 3 divisions total at the beginning of this story. And she's working her way up to the 1st division where she can challenge Emperor Jashugan, who is, of course, the best motorball player in the world. You can see him right there. He's a pretty fancy-looking guy. Jashugan is a really fascinating character in Alita's growth, and we're going to talk about him some more in a minute. But right now, just understand that Motorball it represents everything that Alita is good at, but the story of Motorball is about her engaging with those things for the wrong reasons. She's not doing it because she can elevate the sport of motorball. She's not doing it because she really loves motorball and she wants to be the best. She's doing this instead of addressing her own failings. And that is ultimately a weakness that is going to undermine her campaign to take over motorball. Ito, he goes and he does this ride-along thing. It's pretty... we have this really awesome double-page spread where we just see him experiencing motorball from the point of view of a racer. He's swept along by the adrenaline and the excitement. And then at the end of it, it's revealed that the rider he is racing with has to fight Alita. And he loses pretty badly because third division motorball players just aren't on that level. From that point, we see Alita talking to her techs. We get some background on what's been going on. She's got this mechanic who is a weird guy in a harness there who does almost everything using manipulator arms and winches and all this other stuff. And she has a coach who has pretty much ruined his career on drugs. His nervous system is all burned out. He has to take drugs now basically to keep himself from being twitchy. It's a fascinating world, and a lot of the story is just building things up. Like, we get this entire race with Jashugan, where we see him having just one arm. He has to handicap himself. He's so much better than even the other first division racers that he has to handicap himself. We also learned that Jashugan has some health problems, and this is what eventually brings Ito into the fold and really makes him a central part of this story. Jashugan actually flatlines in the middle of a race. And Ito has been kind of mooching off Jashugan's younger sister, Shimura, right there. And he rescued her, kind of reprising his role as a hunter warrior. He rescued her from some thugs, and she's been kind of keeping him as a pet, for lack of a better word. He's a kept man right now. He's been hunting for Alita, and when he discovers her, he's like, okay, I need to figure out what's going on. I need to get back in touch with her. That doesn't go very well. So right now he's laying low with Jashugan and Shimura while he tries to figure out what he's going to do about his wayward daughter. All in all, a very reasonable, straightforward story. You know, Alita is grieving. Ito, as her father, is there trying to help her, but she doesn't want his help. Okay. Jashugan flatlines in the middle of a race. His brain just stops sending brainwaves. And Shimura realizes that Ito has the mark of Typharis on his forehead. She calls it the doctor's mark. And he's kind of weirded out about that. We don't realize all the context for that right away, but he helps, he does an analysis on Jashugan. He uses essentially Shimura's brainwaves to jumpstart Jashugan's brain. And I don't know if that makes any scientific sense at all. It probably doesn't, but hey, it works. And he's able to get Jashugan back into the race. And that's when you find out that Jashugan has actually had his entire brain remodeled via nanotechnology to make him a better motorball player. And it was done by a person named Desti Nova, who had the mark of Typharis. We are hearing an awful lot about Nova before we ever see him. This is the first indication, however, that the Nova in this story is not really the character that we met in the movie. And I'm going to talk more about that later because we hear more from Nova. We hear him speaking in his own voice in the next volume, in volume 4. So I'm putting off the discussion of Nova until the end of this. But right now, what we see is that Jashugan is a character who has gambled everything on what he's good at, and he has become the best motorball player in the world. That was his impulse. His impulse was to completely overhaul himself so he could be the best at motorball. And he has then taken being the best at motorball and he has made it his duty. He is the champion. He has an obligation to his fans to entertain them. He has an obligation to other racers. That's why he races handicapped. He has to make this a sporting event for the other racers. He has an obligation to his younger sister, who he spends a lot of his time and energy outside of the ring taking care of, because Shimura is, well, she's not the sharpest tool in the shed. She probably takes a fair amount of looking after. This is actually one of the reasons why he is willing to take in Ito, because Jashugan is not naive. He knows there's a lot of reasons people could be doing favors for his sister, and he assesses Ito in some pretty deep and hard-headed ways. He's a very perceptive man, he's a very skilled fighter, and he is the best motorball player there ever was. This makes Jashugan the second balanced character that Alita encounters. The first being Ito, and the second, again, being Jashugan. And it's fitting that they are both on the same side, because right now, Alita is deeply out of balance. She's buried entirely in her impulses, and she needs to be pulled out of that. Ito was able to do that one time with Hugo. In order to do it again, now that she's grieving Hugo's loss, he's going to need help. That help is actually Jashugan, which makes him a very interesting antagonist for this leg of the story. He's clearly a very strong character, not just physically, but he has a strong personality. He's very moral. He defines basically the entire world that Alita has entered into. And that makes him a very formidable obstacle, something that Alita really needs at this stage in the story. What she has on her side is her coach and her mechanic. And that is a pretty significant set of advantages. Her mechanic is the best there is at making motorball chassis. He works because he wants to, not necessarily because he needs the money. And her coach used to be Jashugan's rival. Before Jashugan got his brain remodeled, I forget his name now. Alita's coach was his rival. They raced together against each other a lot. He started taking drugs after Jashugan had his brain remodeled, and he was taking these drugs to try and enhance his reflexes and keep up with his rival. That is one of the reasons why he started taking drugs. He might also have done it for the thrill or the rush. We don't get a great deal of insight into that, but that was definitely a part of it. Okay. Estok, that's his name. Estok is the coach. Or no, I think he's the mechanic, actually. Got a sign here. We also get a pretty good example of the series metaphor in the Damascus blade. And I can't find the shot where we see that being forged. That might actually be in the next volume. But we can see it right there on Alita's motorball suit. The Damascus blade is interesting. Again, in the film, this was turned into a symbol of the superiority of the space worlds over Earth. The Damascus blade was made by Martian technology. It came from a far-flung planet, and it was beyond the abilities of Earth to recreate. It was dangerous even to a place like Zalem. In this story, you can only make Damascus blades in the scrapyard. I mean, technically not true, and I'll get to that in a second. Basically, we are told, Alita states that her goal in playing Motorball is to become a razor's blade of purest steel. And she's warned that pure steel is incredibly brittle. She has set herself this goal very impulsively, and she's being warned, hey, if you really pursue that, you're going to break. A Damascus blade, on the other hand, is made by layering different types of steel of different purities. and thus it is very strong and flexible and able to stand up to the impacts of combat and the dangers of life. This is a key metaphor. It shows that the impulses and the structure and order of society have to be balanced in order to create that well-rounded individual that Alita is on her way to becoming. And we're told you can only make Damascus blades in the scrapyard because you can find different kinds of metal from all over the solar system in that one place. It's the only place you can get that range of different kinds of materials to forge a Damascus blade out of. Now, technically that's not true. I mean, obviously you can create steel any number of ways and through any number of chemical processes. You could make different purities of steel very easily. But as a metaphor for what we're saying about Alita, that is very true. She can only get the kind of refinement that will make her a balanced individual right now in the scrapyard. So, again, we have lost a major symbol about Alita, about her story, about where her character should go in her adaptation to the film. And we've also kind of lost Jashugan, because he went from being the lord of his own world, he went from being the best at Motorball because he just wanted to be the best at Motorball, and he devoted everything about himself to that one task, up to and including his brain, really the only physical part of his body, his original body, that he had left. And he was demoted to a lackey for Nova, basically. He was just an obstacle between Alita and Zalem. I was not really very happy about that. I'm going to talk more about Jashugan's character, again, at the end of the Motorball arc. But that is very important to what makes Jashugan an important character in the story. And our introduction to Motorball ends with this really great scene where we see Alita and Jashugan, that's the wrong page, having an arm wrestling contest. And this is a very odd choice for a contest because both of them are full cyborgs. Their bodies are mechanical. They're not meat, like weightlifting and things like that. Discipline, practice, they don't really affect your body's raw performance. Or do they? This is the moment where we are introduced to Jashugan's superpower. He explains it. He says he has chi. And chi is basically a super sensory power in Alita's world. It is the ability to study and understand your opponent's movements and intentions to the degree that you can predict what they are going to do and where that will put stress on them, where that will make them vulnerable. And Jashugan is able to use chi to overload, to basically flex his arm in such a way that in order to compensate, Alita blows out motors in her own arm, applying force to counter that movement. And it's a very interesting and clever take on the kind of internal energy concept that you find in a lot of Eastern martial arts. It's not really a part of Alita's fighting style, the Panzerkunst. That is a very mechanical fighting style, which is intended strictly for cyber bodies. To be fair, Jashugan's fighting style is called the Machine Clash, and it is also designed for cyber bodies, but it has more of a mystical element to it. But basically, what it boils down to is, right now, Jashugan is just more aware of other people than Alita is. Again, Alita is at the bottom of grief. She is buried under her grief of losing Hugo. She is still struggling with that, and she will actually never entirely get over that, which is pretty accurate based on everything that I've seen in my own life. You don't ever really get over losing someone very close to you. But she's not dealing with it very healthily, and that blinds her to the things going on around her. And this confrontation really shows that Jashugan is not just a formidable opponent. He is just a better opponent. He's more aware of what's around him. He's a better fighter. He overwhelms Alita's Motorball cyber body with a regular civilian cyber body. He is very, very dangerous. Not that he underestimates Alita. In fact, when we see them race, he will use both of his arms. But he is just such a formidable opponent. He's able to get so much more performance out of so much less that he has available to him in this confrontation. And he's kind of got Alita's number. He knows that she is a hot shot, and this is all about her. It's not all about the sport of motorball or some other high-minded ideal that she has. Jashugan has seen through her, and he is ready to take her to the cleaners. And that may actually be what she needs. Certainly what Ito thinks she needs, and it's what he's trying to arrange. And all of that is the build-up for the final race. I haven't talked too much about the motorball races because it's hard to do them any justice without showing them all to you, which is not the point of these analyses. This is more about the art of storytelling that goes into this story. But as a masterpiece of visual storytelling, the motorball races are really worth studying panel by panel. Kishiro really comes into his hyperkinetic action style. His paneling just goes up a level in the motorball races. We see Alita connect with a number of other racers, most notably Ajakuri, who originally has her double nines number. Racer number in the second division. When she goes up to that division, she has to fight him over who can race with that number, which is a really nice little moment. She connects with all of these racers, and she starts to build up a challenge team because while, yes, Alita is a danger to Jashugan, usually, in order to race fairly against Jashugan, you have to bring more than one person. And I think that's another really great indication that Jashugan is pushing just through the rules she has to face in order to race against him. Jashugan is forcing Alita to think about things other than herself. So Motorball, a really great story arc that really expresses a lot of interesting character dynamics about who Alita is, where she needs to go, and where she is right now, without drawing a whole lot of attention to them. Obviously, Ito is thinking a lot about these things, but his point of view is really tainted through his paternal compassion for Alita. And that makes him a little bit of an unreliable narrator in this respect. But as Jashugan and later some of the other motorballers begin to see the personality flaws that Alita really is just ignoring and is using Motorball to ignore, we get the sense that, yes, Ito is correct, and Alita is she's actually the bad actor in the Motorball story arc, which is very interesting. This is Alita's low point, one of them in the story, and Motorball is a great way to pull her out of it. This is a great bit of storytelling. Alita is really being put through the ringer here. She's going to face an obstacle like none she has faced, none she ever will face again, in the personage of Jashugan. And man, I really think that Motorball is one of the high points of this story. And I will discuss the other when we get to it, when we get to Chaos and Den. But as a high point for this story, Motorball is a really good one, and it's a really good example of why I'm kind of happy that we're probably never going to get a sequel to the original movie, because I just don't trust them to do any of Motorball correctly. We did see a Motorball race in the film, and it was pretty well executed, actually. It really captured that frenetic, chaotic feel of a Motorball race as laid out by Kishiro, but the character dynamics, they were already set up to be all wrong. We saw that just in the way Jashugan was made a hurdle for Alita to overcome, rather than being something she cannot overcome, which is what Jashugan really should be in this story. We'll talk again more about Jashugan and his importance as the unbeatable man when we discuss him in depth in the next video. Until then, let me know what you think down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.